Imagine, right, that you are preparing for this massive, grueling mountain expedition. I mean, a real once-in-a-lifetime climb.
Oh, wow. Okay. Setting the scene.
Yeah, exactly. So you've spent years planning this. You've raised all the funds. You've gone out and gathered the absolute best gear on the market.
The top tier stuff.
Right. And you've studied the topographical map so much that you literally see elevation changes in your sleep.
You are locked in.
Completely locked in. You've got this team of people who are just incredibly eager to start climbing. So you're standing at base camp feeling completely ready. But there is a catch.
Okay, what's the catch?
When it comes time to actually tie yourselves together on the rope line, you just start clipping in with whoever happens to be standing nearby.
Wait, really? Just random people?
Yeah. You don't check if they're actually climbing the same peak. You don't ask if, like, their pace matches yours at all.
But that is, I mean, that's wild.
It's completely absurd, right? No actual mountaineer would ever do that, because if the people you are tied to are pulling in totally different directions.
Or if they don't even have the same destination in mind.
Exactly. All that premium gear, all that enthusiastic effort, it isn't going to save you. In fact, it might just literally pull you off the cliff.
Yeah, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
And that tension right there, that brings us into the exact heart of what we were doing today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
I'm really excited for this one.
Me too. We are unpacking a single, really foundational source today. It's an expansive guide titled Building Strategic Mission Partnerships.
It's such a crucial text.
It really is. Our mission today is to guide you, the listener, through a radical paradigm shift. We're looking at how organizations, specifically Christian ministries, which is the focus of our source material.
Right. But honestly, this totally applies to any NGO or, corporate partnerships, any collaborative endeavor, really.
Oh, 100%. We're looking at how they approach the very concept of partnership itself.
Because the overarching premise here is that we have to move away from treating partnerships as these transactional logistical necessities.
Right, the whole you give us money, we do the thing model.
Exactly. We need to view them as a strategic covenantal discipline. And to understand why this matters to you right now, we really have to look at the era we're operating in.
A context is everything.
It is. We live at a time of just unprecedented global connectivity. I mean, information flows instantly.
You can wire money across the globe in seconds from your phone.
Right. But paradoxically, in this hyper-connected environment, outdated models of partnerships, specifically this idea of like one-directional support.
Where a distant benefactor just sends resources down a pipeline to a passive receiver.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Those models are not just ineffective anymore. They are active liabilities.
Wow. Active liabilities. That's a strong phrase.
It is, but it's true. Whether you are managing church missions or coordinating international NGO efforts or even building corporate community partnerships, understanding how to build trust-based, genuinely mutual relationships is basically the only viable path to achieving resilient long-term outcomes.
And the really counterintuitive premise we have to grapple with right out of the gate is this: the greatest limitation on your mission impact isn't your funding.
Right.
It's not your people.
Yeah.
It's not even your overarching strategy.
Which is shocking to a lot of leaders.
It really is. The greatest limitation is the way you choose your partners.
Yeah.
We have this deeply ingrained assumption, especially in the nonprofit and ministry worlds, that effort equals impact. You know, more programs, more trips, more money naturally equals more good done.
Right. The more we do, the better we are.
Exactly. But the reality we are exploring today is that effort does not equal impact. Alignment equals impact.
That is a profound shift in perspective right there. Because most organizations assume that mission effectiveness scales directly with activity.
They just want to see people moving,
Right.
doing things.
Yeah, exactly. But seasoned practitioners, the people really on the ground, they know a harder truth. Impact multiplies through alignment.
And alignment is rarely, if ever, accidental.
Never accidental. It requires really rigorous, often incredibly uncomfortable intentionality.
So let's actually diagnose the problem with the status quo, because before we can build these incredible aligned partnerships, we really have to look at what the text calls the illusion of activity.
Yes, the illusion of activity.
Yes, from the outside, it looks like a lot of good work is being done out there right now. I mean, billions of dollars are moved, thousands of trips are taken, endless projects are launched.
It looks so busy.
It does, but underneath that surface level activity, there is a massive fracture.
Yeah, what is actually happening is highly fragmented. You have countless organizations, churches, agencies, all operating in parallel rather than in true partnership.
Operating in parallel. Okay, let's unpack this because I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If multiple organizations are out there raising their own funds and doing their own projects, even if they are duplicating work, isn't that still a net positive? I mean, more total work gets done, right? Why is operating in parallel such a bad thing?
It's a great question, and it really gets to the core of organizational psychology. Operating in parallel seems totally harmless until you look at it from the perspective of the local community that's actually receiving the help.
Okay, put me in their shoes.
Imagine 3 different international ministries showing up in the same post-disaster region. None of them are talking to each other because they all have their own specific donor bases to report back to.
Right, they need their own photos for the newsletter.
Exactly. They all want to build an orphanage or maybe a clinic so they can put their name on it. So what happens? They start competing for the same local contractors.
Oh, wow, which naturally drives up the cost of materials for everyone.
Yep. And they overwhelm the local leadership, who now have to host 3 different sets of executives flying in.
That sounds exhausting for the locals.
It is. And most importantly, they often completely ignore the actual articulated needs of the local church or community leaders.
Right, the locals might just be asking for, I don't know, trauma counseling support, not huge new buildings.
Exactly. The parallel operation is driven by the sending organization's need for visible metrics, not the receiving community's need for holistic restoration.
It reinforces dependency, doesn't it? Because the power, the planning, all the resources remain entirely in the hands of the outsiders.
100%. It's a really tragic outcome of good intentions.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's frankly pretty devastating. It happens because so many of these partnerships are just built on convenience.
Convenience or familiarity?
Right, or just short-term emotional appeals. You know, someone comes to a church or a boardroom, gives this deeply moving presentation. The need is obviously real and urgent, and so the organization just writes a check.
The emotional response is totally genuine.
It is, but writing a check based on emotional appeal isn't a partnership. It's not based on strategic fit, it's not based on theological coherence, and it's certainly not based on long-term trust.
And the result of that convenience-based approach is entirely predictable. You get these initiatives that start with a massive burst of enthusiasm, but then they plateau very, very quickly.
You end up with partnerships that feel deeply transactional.
Let's actually break down what that transactional reality feels like on the ground. Because for the sender of the resources, they usually feel disconnected and underinformed.
They're basically just an ATM.
Yeah. They're an ATM waiting around for a highly polished quarterly report to justify the expense to their board. They don't actually know what's happening day to day.
And the receiver on the ground, they feel managed, they feel heavily scrutinized, they are basically reduced to a project rather than being treated as a peer.
That is exactly how they feel.
I mean, I've talked to local leaders who say they spend like 40% of their time just translating and formatting reports to keep their Western donors happy instead of actually doing the work in their community.
It's such a massive drain on their energy. The quarterly report basically becomes a work of fiction designed to just keep the money flowing.
Which breeds this really subtle dishonesty into the entire relationship.
Exactly. And the ultimate mission itself becomes fragmented. The local communities end up experiencing inconsistency. You know, a revolving door of short-term fixes and shifting priorities based on whatever the donor wants to fund this year.
Rather than sustained, rooted transformation.
Right.
You know, it's like treating a partnership as just a channel for resources. Treating a mission partnership as just a logistical channel for money or volunteer labor is like treating a marriage as just a joint bank account.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
Right. I mean, sincerity and good intentions aren't enough to run a household, and they definitely aren't enough to run a mission.
You can have a couple who are both wonderful, sincere people.
But if their only point of connection is depositing funds into the same account to pay the electric bill, that's not a marriage. That is a roommate agreement.
It's purely a logistical arrangement.
Exactly. And mission was never meant to be a solo enterprise or a mere logistical arrangement.
The problem is that good intentions do not automatically produce good strategy. Organizations exhaust themselves not because the need out there is too great, but because they keep reaching for isolated solutions to a shared problem.
They fund projects they don't fully understand.
Yes, they support partners they haven't rigorously evaluated. They confuse their own enthusiasm with actual structural alignment.
So The shift that is proposed in this text, this move toward what we are calling covenantal collaboration, it changes the fundamental question an organization asks at its
Right.
genesis.
It flips the script entirely.
Instead of sitting in a boardroom and asking, who can help us execute our predetermined plans? The better, much more difficult question becomes, with whom are we truly aligned in purpose, conviction, and practice?
With whom are we truly aligned? It requires you to totally let go of your predetermined plan.
Which is terrifying for control-oriented organizations.
Oh, absolutely. But when you make that shift, a healthy partnership becomes a strategic asset, not just a support structure. It becomes a relationship where wisdom, credibility, accountability, and local insight flow both ways.
It's not just funding flowing from the global north to the global south, or from the massive billion-dollar organization to the grassroots one.
Right, the wisdom flows back up.
And the urgency of this, it just cannot be overstated. We're in an age of intense scrutiny. Vague goodwill doesn't cut it anymore.
No, it really doesn't. Communities on the receiving end of these missions are acutely aware of the harm that comes from paternalism and detached decision-making.
They have the internet. They know exactly how much money is being raised in their name.
They absolutely do. The old model of distant benefactors shaping local reality from afar is actively collapsing right now. True mutuality means the sending organization doesn't just support from above, it listens, learns, and walks alongside people with genuine dignity.
So let's say an organization gets this. They realize they need a two-way street. They realize they need to listen. That forces us to deeply examine where the work is actually happening.
Yes, the location and context.
We have to talk about local credibility and what the guide refers to as the theology of belonging. Because you can have the most aligned, well-intentioned partnership on paper, but if it doesn't translate to the local street corner, it's practically useless.
This is where we encounter a very bold, non-negotiable reality in the text. Sincerity and even absolute theological correctness are completely insufficient if the local community does not trust or recognize the organization.
Wow.
Yeah, an organization's effectiveness is completely inseparable from its local legitimacy.
That is a very tough pill to swallow for organizations that pride themselves on having the right message or the best program.
Oh, yeah. The assumption is usually, hey, our doctrine is sound, our strategy is incredibly efficient, our intentions are pure, so the results will naturally follow.
People will welcome us because what we are offering is objectively good.
Right. But that is a deeply arrogant assumption, really. The incarnational model is the ultimate counter to this.
Right, looking at how Jesus operated.
Exactly. The text notes that Jesus didn't save humanity from a distance as some generic, floating abstraction. He entered a specific culture.
He learned a specific language.
Yes, he lived within a specific history and social reality. Externally imposed missions that totally ignore this local reality usually fail, or worse, they create toxic dependency.
The incarnational model is just so central here. If an externally designed strategy is dropped into a community without deep cultural understanding, it unintentionally communicates, we know what is best for you.
Even if those words are never explicitly spoken out loud, the structure communicates it.
Exactly. And there is a powerful illustration of what this looks like in practice, highlighting the vast difference between simple presence and actual imposition.
Are you talking about the story of the ministry entering the impoverished neighborhood?
Yes, that exact story. I really want to spend some time on this because it perfectly encapsulates the friction we are talking about.
It's a great example.
So you have this ministry that decides to enter a deeply marginalized, economically depressed area, and they do what most well-funded organizations do.
They arrive with a ton of resources.
Boundless enthusiasm, a team of highly educated staff, and a very clear, externally designed 10-point plan for community revitalization.
A plan they probably made in a boardroom months ago.
Oh, absolutely. But after a few months on the ground, they hit a massive wall.
The community simply doesn't engage with them.
Exactly. They throw events and literally no one shows up. They offer free services and people just walk right past the building.
And the ministry team is totally baffled by this.
Right, they're thinking, we are offering free help. Why on earth are they rejecting us? But as they eventually realize, the community isn't just lacking material support. The people there are carrying heavy, generational layers of historical neglect.
They are operating in a context of deep, justified distrust. I mean, they have seen a dozen organizations like this one come and go.
Right. They've seen the politicians come for photo ops.
Yeah.
They've seen the university researchers come to study them like bugs in a jar. They've seen the big charities launch a flashy 5-year initiative, only to completely pull the funding after 2 years when the board loses interest.
Because the trend shifted.
Exactly. So when this new ministry shows up, the local community isn't looking at their shiny new brochures. They are looking at them through the lens of all those broken promises.
So how does the ministry respond? Because the typical response is to just double down.
Right, to market harder, to
Yeah.
try and force the community to see the value of the imported model.
But they don't do that. And this is the real turning point of the story.
Instead of pushing their imported model harder, they do something genuinely radical. They stop.
They slow down.
They literally start talking and start listening. They completely abandon their 10-point plan. They start spending hours just sitting with local elders, parents, and neighborhood pastors.
They actually learn the history of what has been tried before.
Yes, why it failed, and who the community actually already trusts. And the crucial realization hits them: the people most capable of shaping lasting change in this neighborhood aren't the outside experts with the clipboards and the master's degrees.
No, it's the trusted local believers who already live there,
The people who actually know the names of the kids on the street.
which necessitates a complete structural shift for the ministry.
A total shift. They move their entire posture from directing the community to equipping the community.
That's huge.
They take their resources and they put them directly in the hands of the local leaders. They let the local leaders take the wheel, set the agenda, and determine the pace, while the outside team just provides the training, the administrative back-end support, and the encouragement.
And over time, the community stops seeing the ministry as something imported and alien and starts seeing it as something shared.
Trust grows. Local ownership grows. Real transformation actually happens because the mission became local in a deeply meaningful way.
What's fascinating here is, when we connect this to the systemic level, it exposes the critical difference between paternalistic ministry and incarnational ministry.
Unpack that difference a bit more.
Well, when local leaders are genuinely empowered, they aren't treated as passive recipients of outside expertise. They are recognized as the primary stewards of wisdom and the only true interpreters of their own context.
Right.
When local leaders are sidelined, when they are brought into the room only after the budget has been set and the strategy has been finalized, it creates a subtle but profound wound.
Because it's essentially saying their input doesn't really matter.
Exactly. It communicates to the people closest to the field that they know less about their own home than those who just arrived on a flight from halfway across the world.
Ouch. Yeah. So if you are listening right now, whether you are running a nonprofit, leading a corporate social responsibility initiative, or managing a church mission, you really need to ask yourself a very hard question.
A gut check.
A serious gut check. In your projects, are the local leaders genuinely empowered? Do they have actual veto power? Or are they just sidelined and consulted as a formality after the big decisions have already been made in a boardroom thousands of miles away?
That is the defining diagnostic question.
Huh.
Because according to the theology of belonging, people are rarely transformed by institutions they do not feel belong to them.
Wow, that's powerful. Service alone does not create trust.
It doesn't. You can hand out meals for a decade, but trust only grows when people sense they are being loved from within a shared life, not studied from a distance as a project.
And the most dangerous assumption an organization can make is thinking that trust can somehow be borrowed.
Oh yes, borrowed trust.
Explain that. What are the mechanics of borrowing trust?
Well, an organization can arrive in a new city or a new country with a stellar reputation globally. They might have incredible funding, famous board members, and a history of massive success in a dozen other countries.
They've got an amazing resume.
Right. But all of that brand equity means absolutely nothing if they haven't earned trust locally in this specific place through humble, consistent presence.
The locals don't care about the global resume.
Exactly. A community will look at an impressive organization and ask these quiet, highly skeptical questions. Are these people here for us, or are we just a new data point for their annual report?
Will they stay when the funding inevitably shifts?
Right. Do they actually understand our history, or are they just repeating assumptions they read in an article? And if the organization cannot answer those questions credibly, they are operating on borrowed permission, not earned legitimacy.
And that is a foundation built on sand.
It really is.
It's like trying to use a credit card from a bank that doesn't even exist in that country. The currency of your global reputation just doesn't transfer. You have to earn the local currency, which is trust.
And trust takes years to earn and literal seconds to lose.
Exactly. So let's assume you've done the hard work. You've slowed down, you've listened, you've earned that local trust, and you are ready to partner. Does that mean you just open the floodgates and partner with anyone who is doing good work in that area?
Oh, absolutely not.
Because I would assume turning down free money or willing volunteer labor is seen as professional suicide in the nonprofit world. But this brings us to a really difficult reality: the hard truth of strategic fit.
Yes. What happens when good isn't right?
Exactly. What happens when you find an organization that checks all the boxes? They have local credibility, they are doing wonderful, life-changing work, but they are still the wrong partner for you?
This is one of the most agonizing situations a leader can face. It is the realization that in purpose-driven work, it is entirely possible to encounter an organization that is admirable, highly capable, and genuinely helpful, yet structurally incompatible with your specific calling.
When good isn't right, that is so hard to navigate, especially when you have board members or donors clamoring for you to partner with a big visible brand.
Everything in us wants to say yes to good work.
But strategic fit requires three distinct elements. If any of these are missing, the partnership is basically a ticking time bomb.
Let's really break these down.
Okay, so first, shared mission priorities. Second, complementary strengths. And third, a shared vision for long-term outcomes. Let's start with shared mission priorities.
Right, because every healthy organization has a core focus, like a specific lane they're meant to run in. Suppose a local church's primary priority is deep, relational discipleship and long-term spiritual formation.
Okay.
But they're offered a partnership with a massive, highly efficient NGO that strictly focuses on rapid, large-scale humanitarian relief, drilling wells,
Yeah.
delivering vaccines, that kind of thing.
Amazing work, obviously.
Incredible work.
Yeah.
But the NGO's priority is speed and scale,
Yeah.
not deep relational investment. If the church partners with them, they will constantly be frustrated by the lack of spiritual integration.
And the NGO will be incredibly frustrated by the church wanting to slow everything down just to build relationships.
Exactly. Neither priority is wrong at all, but the fit is terribly poor.
And the second element, complementary strengths. The analogy of the body is so apt here: a hand is not an eye. A grassroots local church is not an international logistics NGO.
True partnership isn't about duplication, it's about synergy.
Right. Are you actually strengthening what the other cannot do alone? If two organizations have the exact same strengths, say, they are both incredible at high-level visionary planning, but terrible at on-the-ground execution.
Putting them together doesn't solve the problem at all,
It just creates a room full of visionaries with no one to actually do the work.
which is a nightmare. And that third requirement, a shared vision for long-term outcomes, that is where the hidden traps are. This is where the most painful divorces in the nonprofit world happen.
Because short-term cooperation can easily mask deep strategic differences.
Oh, easily.
How so? Give me an example of how that masks the differences.
Think about building a school. Two organizations can enthusiastically agree to partner to build a school in a rural village. For the first year, everything is totally great.
The funds are raised, the bricks are laid, the ribbon is cut.
Yes. Everyone feels fantastic about the immediate visible result. But Organization A views the school as a finished project. Their long-term outcome is simply a built school.
And they want to move on to the next village, to build another one, to satisfy their donors' desire for scale.
Exactly. Organization B, however, views the building as just step one. Their long-term outcome is community transformation.
So they want to stick around.
Right. They want to spend the next 10 years funding teacher training, developing local curriculum, integrating the school into the local economy.
So as soon as the building is finished, these differing long-term visions violently collide.
Yes. Organization A is ready to pack up and leave.
Mm-hmm.
Organization B feels completely abandoned.
That is such a clear example, and it really highlights the story in the text of the wise no. I want to explore the boardroom dynamics of this, because saying no is so countercultural.
It goes against every instinct.
It really does.
Yeah.
So there is a congregation looking to partner with a highly impressive humanitarian organization doing excellent relief work overseas. The reports were flawless, the staff was gracious, the branding was incredible.
On paper, to any outside observer or donor, it was the ideal partnership.
But as the church leadership really dug into the mechanics of how the NGO operated, They saw a massive mismatch.
The priorities didn't align.
Right. The church's core calling was long-term gospel formation and strengthening local indigenous churches. The NGO, while doing absolutely vital public health work, had almost no integration of discipleship.
And crucially, local Christian leaders had almost zero decision-making power in the NGO's corporate structure.
All the decisions were made in a Western capital, so the church had a choice. Do they ride the coattails of the successful NGO and get some easy wins to show their congregation, or do they hold out for real alignment?
They chose alignment.
They did. They respectfully declined the partnership. And I have to push back here, playing devil's advocate, because I can hear the critics now.
Let's hear it.
If you're a leader in that church and you know that kids are getting clean water or medical care through this NGO, isn't it wildly narrow-minded or even ungenerous to say, no, we aren't going to help you provide clean water because you don't fit perfectly into our specific theological or strategic lane?
Doesn't that sound incredibly self-righteous?
It does. It feels wrong.
It is a very natural pushback, and it is the exact psychological pressure many leaders face. It's the intense fear of missing out on doing good.
Yeah.
But the counter-argument is grounded in a deep theology of stewardship. God is a God of order, not confusion. Saying no isn't about excluding others or acting superior. It is about recognizing your own limits and your specific calling.
Not every good work is your assigned work.
Exactly. It's actually more merciful, more loving, and far more professional to say a clear, definitive no early on, rather than letting a partnership form that will inevitably become strained, toxic, and resentful due to those hidden mismatches in long-term goals.
A clear no can protect a future yes. That phrase from the text is an absolute lifesaver.
It really is.
Because in that specific story, after enduring all the awkwardness of saying no to the big, flashy NGO, the church just kept looking. And eventually, they found a much smaller, far less polished partner.
A partner that actually fit.
Perfectly. This smaller partner didn't have the glossy brochures, but they perfectly matched the church's long-term vision of empowering local leadership and integrating deep spiritual formation with physical relief.
The work was probably undeniably slower.
Oh, way slower. It wasn't as easy to put on an Instagram reel, but it was exponentially deeper, and the resources were used with incredible effectiveness without the constant draining friction of strategic tension.
This requires a very forward-looking humility. It requires leaders to stop reacting to immediate opportunities and asking, what do we want to do this year?
And start asking, what kind of fruit do we hope to see in 5, 10, or 20 years?
Right. If you ignore strategic fit because you are desperate to just do something, you invite relational confusion. You start assuming you agree just because you both care about the same general issue.
Yeah. But caring without clarity inevitably leads to deep disappointment.
Always.
Okay, so that covers how we evaluate new opportunities and find the courage to say no. But let's move into the reality most of our listeners are facing right now. What do we do with the partnerships we're already in?
The legacy portfolios.
Exactly. Because most organizations aren't starting from scratch. They have a legacy portfolio of partners. And the argument here is that just maintaining the status quo across all your existing relationships is actually a massive failure of leadership.
It totally challenges the very strong institutional instinct to treat all partnerships equally. Organizations, especially in the ministry and nonprofit sectors, tend to just scatter their attention evenly across all their relationships, regardless of how fruitful or aligned they actually are.
They do this out of a sense of fairness, right?
Yeah.
Or sometimes just bureaucratic inertia.
Exactly. But time, energy, relational bandwidth, and trust are highly finite resources. If you spread them too thin, treating everyone exactly the same, even your highest potential partnerships become shallow and transactional.
It's basically the cowardice of spreading resources evenly to avoid making hard choices. Think about the church network in the text that was supporting 4 different global partners.
Right. For years, they operated on total autopilot.
They gave all 4 partners the exact same level of funding, the exact same basic level of communication, the same obligatory mention in the annual report. They were preserving uniformity, and they probably felt like they were being incredibly fair.
But it was at the profound expense of fruitfulness.
So they realized they had to change tactics. They had to make strategic moves.
Because the absolute necessity of leadership is making choices.
Mm-hmm.
They had to identify and deepen one high-potential partnership, and they had to reevaluate or gracefully exit one misaligned relationship.
Let's talk about the deepening first. They identified their strongest, most vibrant partnership, the one that had incredible local credibility, high strategic alignment, and real momentum, and they decided to deepen it. But what does deepening actually look like?
Because the lazy answer is just, we wrote them a bigger check.
Right. But that's not what happened.
No. Deepening a partnership doesn't simply mean increasing the budget line. It means increasing intentionality and vulnerability. It means moving from a transactional posture to a collaborative one.
So practically speaking, what does that involve?
Practically, it involves more frequent, honest communication. It means giving the partner direct access to your leadership team, not just routing them through an entry-level program officer.
Oh, that's a big shift.
It is. It means shared strategic planning, where you actually co-author the goals for the next 3 years together. It is a very heavy investment of time, mutual learning, and relational presence.
You are essentially pulling them much closer to the center of your organization. But then this network had to face the other side of the coin.
The exit.
The exit. They had one partnership out of the 4 that was completely stagnant. It existed purely out of habit. The original leaders who forged the connection had retired years ago.
The theology of the 2 organizations had subtly drifted apart.
The strategy no longer fit. The relationship was spiritually hollow, just going through the motions of wiring money once a year. So they did the hardest thing a ministry can do. They respectfully exited that weakest partnership.
And we really need to dissect the anatomy of that exit. Why is it so incredibly hard to break up with a ministry partner?
Because you feel like you are abandoning them. You feel like you are just pulling the rug out from under good people.
Exactly. The fear of the fallout is totally paralyzing. But exiting a misaligned partnership is not a failure of love. It is what the text calls moral realism.
Moral realism.
Yes, misalignment happens. Contexts change over decades. Needs evolve. Sometimes, continuing to fund a stagnant relationship out of blind loyalty actually becomes a form of quiet harm.
How is it harm?
Because it traps both organizations in a lifeless routine and prevents those funds from being deployed somewhere they could truly flourish. To exit a relationship well requires immense humility and compassion.
You don't just cut the cord overnight.
Never. You provide a transition runway, you communicate clearly and honestly without assigning blame, and you bless them as they move forward.
Christian leadership, or really any ethical leadership, cannot be governed by the feel of seeming ungrateful, the fear of disappointing people, or the fear of conflict.
It just can't.
By exiting that stagnant partnership, the network didn't become smaller in spirit, it became exponentially clearer in its focus.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Saying yes more deeply to a high-potential partnership is not playing favorites. It is faithful stewardship of your influence. And saying no to a misaligned relationship protects your generosity from being totally diluted.
I want to challenge you, the listener, right now. Pause and think about the projects, the collaborations, the vendors, the ministries you currently support. Look at your portfolio.
Take a hard look.
What is one collaboration you are preserving strictly out of habit? Or worse, out of guilt? What relationship are you pouring finite resources into that consistently produces confusion, frustration, or dependency simply because you are afraid of the awkward conversation required to end it?
It's a heavy question, but completely necessary.
But here is the real practical dilemma. How do you actually know? How do you know when a partnership has reached the point where it needs to be deepened or when it needs to be exited? It doesn't just happen by a sudden gut feeling or a dramatic falling out.
No, it usually happens very quietly. This leads us into the mechanics of preventing the quiet drift. Because partnerships don't usually blow up overnight in a massive scandal. They drift quietly over years.
The analogy of a ship at sea is perfect here. A partnership is not a monument that you build once and then just stand back and admire. It is a living, breathing relationship.
And because it is living, it must be tended.
It must be regularly assessed, intentionally nurtured, and strategically adjusted. If you assume that the alignment you had on day 1 automatically holds true on day 1,000, you are inviting structural failure.
It is exactly like steering a massive cargo ship. You set your coordinates when you leave port in New York, and your heading is perfectly aligned for London.
But the ocean is dynamic.
Extremely dynamic. There are subsurface currents pushing against the hull. The wind shifts constantly. If the captain just locks the wheel and goes to sleep, assuming the initial alignment is enough, disaster strikes.
If you don't have instruments to check your heading, and if you aren't making tiny, constant micro adjustments to the wheel, a 1-degree drift over a journey of thousands of miles means you don't just miss your pork, you end up on an entirely different continent.
The partnerships are exactly the same.
Yeah.
The people leading the organizations change. The economic context changes. The local, on-the-ground needs evolve.
Let's look at the real-world example in the guide of the long-standing church and mission partnership that almost fell victim to this exact drift.
Yes, the infrastructure partnership.
For years, the relationship was incredibly healthy and mutually beneficial. The church provided specific project funding for infrastructure, the mission built the infrastructure and reported back, and everyone was totally satisfied.
But over the course of a decade, the reality on the ground profoundly shifted.
The local ministry matured.
Yes, they no longer needed basic project funding to build physical buildings. They desperately needed direct, flexible support for intensive leadership development and theological training for their new staff.
Furthermore, the old rigid rhythm of the church demanding quarterly written reports was entirely too slow and cumbersome for the rapid pace of change happening in the local community.
The reporting requirement itself became a massive burden rather than a bridge.
If they hadn't been paying attention, if they had just kept the wheel locked, that partnership would have become deeply strained, resentful, and ultimately irrelevant.
The church would have kept forcing money into infrastructure the community didn't need, and the local ministry would have felt completely unheard.
But because they had a system in place, a formal review cycle, they didn't have to abandon the relationship when it started to feel misaligned.
They caught the drift early, they adjusted the wheel.
They shifted from formal, quarterly written reports to monthly, honest, relational conversations over video calls.
Which is such a better way to communicate anyway.
It really is. They listened to the changing needs and reallocated their funding from general infrastructure support into specific leadership mentoring and salary support.
They let the partnership adapt to the new reality. And because of those micro adjustments, the partnership didn't just survive, it breathed again. It found a totally second life.
But we really have to address why organizations hate review cycles so much. Let's be honest, in the corporate world and even in the nonprofit world, a review is almost always punitive.
It usually means someone is looking for an excuse to cut your funding or fire you.
Exactly. So how do you implement a review cycle that doesn't just trigger immediate defensiveness and panic from your partners?
It entirely comes down to the posture of the sending organization. The posture required is absolute humility.
Humility is key.
A foundational rule for these cycles is review is not suspicion. Review is care. Love pays attention.
I love that. Love pays attention.
A humble organization doesn't treat an assessment or a feedback loop as a threat, an interrogation, or a way to assert dominance. They treat it as a form of grace that protects a relationship against hidden power imbalances and relational erosion.
One of the practical tools for this is the partnership review framework. It suggests asking very tactical, operational questions first, just to clear the air. Like, what is currently stalled? What are you waiting on from us? Where are the logistical bottlenecks?
Get the practical stuff out of the way.
Right, but then it forces you to ask the much deeper relational questions. Are we still aligned in our ultimate purpose? What unspoken tensions have surfaced in the last 6 months?
Have the roles of our key leaders shifted?
And crucially, are we relying on the distant reputation of this partnership instead of looking at the actual current local fruit?
It forces you to look at the instruments on your ship instead of just staring out at the horizon. And it really protects against the silent killer of partnerships, complacency.
A relationship that is never reviewed might be convenient, it might be easy to manage, but it isn't necessarily loving.
What is not examined eventually weakens. What is not actively nurtured eventually thins out. These review cycles, when they are conducted with genuine humility and grace, give the partnership a predictable rhythm of confession, honest feedback, and recalibration.
That is vastly superior to waiting for a crisis to force a repair.
Oh, undoubtedly.
This brings us to the absolute core of this entire discussion. The deepest, most critical purpose of these review cycles, the reason you have to look at the instruments, is to uncover the most uncomfortable truth in any collaboration.
We have to talk about power dynamics.
Yes, power dynamics, mutuality, and what all of this ultimately witnesses to the world.
This is where the rubber meets the road, and where the most friction exists in global partnerships.
Yeah.
We have to address the stark reality that wherever there is financial or institutional asymmetry,
Where one side has the money and the other side has the need.
exactly, wherever that exists, there is an immense, almost gravitational temptation for one side to completely dominate the other.
And it rarely looks like a cartoon villain demanding obedience. It happens so quietly. It's wrapped in the most polite, gracious, spiritual language imaginable.
We just want to ensure good stewardship, they say.
We just need to align with our board's strategic vision. But the functional reality is devastating. The donor slowly becomes the decider.
The sender of the funds subtly morphs into the director of the local strategy.
That distinction, the donor becoming the decider, is literally the death of mutuality.
It is the exact difference between being a benefactor and being a co-laborer. Support often implies a one-way flow of aid from the strong, wealthy organization to the weak, impoverished one. It inherently creates a hierarchy.
But service or co-laboring implies shared participation.
It implies that both sides bring essential, irreplaceable value to the table. The local partner brings the contextual wisdom, the relational capital, and the incarnational presence.
Which is just as valuable, if not more so, than the financial capital the Western partner brings.
Exactly.
Let's get incredibly practical here and look at the micro manifestations of this power dynamic, because it shows up in the smallest details. Who sets the agenda for the Zoom calls? Does the global North partner just send an agenda, or is it co-created?
What language is the meeting conducted in? Is the local partner forced to speak their second or third language just to make the donor comfortable?
Who controls the mute button? Who demands reports in a format that makes sense in New York but makes zero sense in Nairobi?
Trust is the soil of fruitfulness, and trust is instantly killed by those microaggressions of power.
Trust is not built by occasional grand gestures or by flying in once a year for a ribbon-cutting ceremony and taking photos with local children.
Trust is built slowly, by showing up consistently. It is built when commitments are meticulously kept, when difficult conversations about strategy aren't postponed or ignored, and when leaders invest in relational presence, not just financial provision.
I want to walk through the most confronting exercise we have regarding this. It's a power dynamics audit.
Oh, this is a tough one.
It really is. If you are listening to this and you manage partnerships, whether in ministry, philanthropy, or business, I want you to mentally run this audit on your most important partnership right now. Ask yourself these 4 brutal questions.
Ready.
Number 1, who has the most money in this relationship? Number 2, who speaks the most often and for the longest duration in your joint meetings?
Number 3, who actually has the final decision-making influence when there is a disagreement on strategy?
And number 4, crucially, who can walk away from this partnership with the least cost to themselves?
That last question is the absolute ultimate test of leverage.
If the answer to all those questions points back to your organization, if you have the money, the microphone, the final say, and the ability to walk away unharmed while the local partner collapses, then you do not have a mutual partnership.
You have a disguised hierarchy. You have a patron-client relationship dressed up in the language of collaboration.
And the harsh reality for ministries is that the gospel does not sanctify domination. It sanctifies mutuality. The measure of success at the end of the year isn't just how many wells were dug or how many programs were funded.
The ultimate measure is whether the process of doing the work expressed genuine humility, shared ownership, and a total surrender of power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, there's a beautiful soaring point about the ultimate purpose of all this effort. Mission partnership isn't just a pragmatic strategy to get things done more efficiently.
No, the partnership itself is a witness to the world.
Expand on that. How is a bureaucratic partnership a witness?
Because the secular world is entirely accustomed to alliances built strictly on self-interest, leverage, and power dynamics. Corporate mergers, political treaties, even international aid, they are all fundamentally about protecting assets and maximizing leverage.
Right. Who gets the better deal?
Exactly. But when diverse groups, people from entirely different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds, with wildly different levels of financial influence work together in genuine, radical humility, it completely shatters that paradigm.
When a wealthy Western church willingly submits its strategy to the wisdom of a grassroots pastor in the global South, sharing power and bearing one another's burdens, it is radical.
It becomes a living, breathing parable of reconciliation. It proves to a cynical world that patience, generosity, and shared sacrifice are actually possible.
The future of deep, transformative, collaborative work doesn't rely on bigger budgets. It doesn't rely on slicker branding, more aggressive fundraising campaigns, or better reporting software.
It relies on interdependence.
It relies on the willingness of powerful organizations to yield authority when local wisdom demands it, and to recognize that strength is actually multiplied when it is shared, not when it is hoarded and protected.
It is a profound call to move beyond the Western illusion of self-sufficiency, to recognize that we are not meant to operate as isolated heroes swooping in to save the day, but as faithful, humble co-laborers in a much larger story.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's synthesize this journey we've been on, because we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by diagnosing the illusion of activity, realizing that just because you are busy duplicating work and operating out of convenience doesn't mean you're being effective. In fact, it leads to fragmented transactional relationships that reinforce dependency. We learned that we have to fundamentally shift toward covenantal alignment.
We then explored the absolute non-negotiable necessity of local credibility. We saw that sincerity and good doctrine cannot replace the deep, incarnational, often agonizingly slow work of earning local trust and genuinely empowering local leaders to drive the strategy.
From there, we faced the hard truth of strategic fit. The realization that an organization can be doing incredible, noble work and still be the entirely wrong partner for you if your core priorities, complementary strengths, and long-term visions don't align.
We learned that it takes immense professional courage to say a wise no to good work in order to protect your specific calling.
And we discussed how it takes equal courage to make strategic, decisive moves with your existing legacy partnerships, to reject the cowardice of spreading resources evenly, and instead actively deepen the high-potential relationships through intentionality and shared planning.
While possessing the moral realism to reevaluate or gracefully exit the misaligned ones.
We talked about steering the ship, the absolute necessity of maintaining living review cycles so we don't drift quietly off course over the years. We have to assess, nurture, and adjust through microcorrections, adopting a posture where review is seen as an act of care, not an act of suspicion.
And finally, we confronted the uncomfortable, hidden reality of power dynamics, running that audit to ensure that the donor doesn't silently become the dictator, recognizing that true mutuality is the ultimate witness of a healthy partnership.
Ultimately, building a strategic partnership does not start with better spreadsheets, tighter contracts, or more efficient logistics. It starts with a fundamental posture of humility.
It starts with a willingness to listen long before you ever prescribe a solution, and the realization that your mission was never meant to be a solo assignment.
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. This is an extrapolation from the legacy alignment exercise that serves as the capstone of this entire philosophy, and it circles right back to where we started standing at base camp, looking at the rope line tying us to our partners.
Fast forward 5 years into the future. Imagine that tomorrow an economic crisis hits, and every single source of your funding completely evaporates. The bank accounts are entirely empty, the grants are gone, the wealthy donors have vanished.
Which of your current partnerships would actually survive that crisis? Which of those relationships are built so deeply on mutual trust, shared wisdom, and genuine reciprocal friendship that the local leaders would still pick up the phone to pray with you and dream with you, even without the transactional flow of money?
It is a devastatingly clarifying question. Because if the answer is none, what are you actually building? Are you building a resilient, shared, incarnational mission? Or are you just funding a very expensive illusion?
Something to really think about the next time you go to clip into that rope. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.